And we use that sort of as a window to talk about some of the terrible stuff that's been going on in our country. But that wasn't quite satisfying. And so today I just wanted to check in with you about this summer. About what this summer is revealing about our country and revealing about our community and ourselves and the systems that we live in. And as I began to wade into that with some intentionality rather than reactivity, I became very confused. And I became depressed. And the events of this summer feel like they just keep slamming in to me. And I see you nodding. So I know that you feel similar, understand what I mean by that. It's this wave after wave of disbelief and then heartbreak and then shock. That's usually how it goes for me. I see something and my initial reaction is that can't happen. And more, that can't happen again. And then when it dawns on me that in fact it did happen, then it's heartbreak. And then I move into shock, where there's just confusion and I don't know where to stand and I don't know what to do. And I don't know what to think. So my method of coping with all this is research. Stay here, this is safe-ish. This is not as safe, so I go right there and I do research and I learn. But the thing is that I've been researching and learning about hate and violence and where they are and why they are and sometimes where and why they are not. And that's not all I can do. That's another thing that I've been learning. But it is immediate and it is in some ways effective. And yet, I always end my research and learning in the same place that I began it. I'm still confused, dismayed, depressed. I'm still beaten by the waves, and I still feel like I'm in a hurricane of reactivity, response, hope. Sometimes I forget which feels good. That feels the best, but that doesn't help anybody but me. And that hurricane just whirls, and there I am, and there I would be, except for the obligation and opportunity to come before you and share this. And so for that, I thank God for you all. So religious community is really important for a few fundamental purposes, which I think actually become kind of central to how we are going to enter into all of this. And I think that we gather as an expression and even more as an aspiration of certain values. And these values are essentially stories. They are stories about ourselves. We tell ourselves we are this kind of person. We are a welcoming congregation. We are a kind person. But these stories need testing. These stories need practice. And these stories need support. And so because our stories, our values take work to bring to life, or because they are under attack in our larger culture, or because we sometimes actually get the opportunity to delight in them and because sometimes we fail to live into them. Because of all of those things and more, we need each other. And so we come together to hold each other and care. We also gather to hold each other accountable. Accountable in care. Always in care. And even as we consider some of the painful events of this summer, those two things need to be in partnership, accountability and care, because the accountability part tells us the work that we have to do. The care gives us the safety to do it. And that is why we come every week, and maybe particularly this week, after the events of last week, the last 2 weeks after the events of this summer. We have seen and experienced one trauma after another, and that is not so different in some ways from every day. We constantly navigate and move through traumas. But the scale of events recently, the presentation, the representation, the causes behind them, the stakes of them, the costs, the ugliness of this summer's violence is too much. And worse yet, we are learning that the truth is that for those who have been targeted for violence, this summer is not so different from other summers and other weeks and other days. Our consciousness has changed. But the events that we are now conscious of are not necessarily unprecedented, new. They are, in fact, quite chronic. And I do not have the breadth of vision, the depth of empathy, the courage, or perhaps even the time to feel or demonstrate to you or to invite you into the immensity of the pain again. And it's too much for us, any of us, to see in its entirety. And it feels overwhelming. It feels epidemic. And this violence is at times intentional and at times systematic, and all too frequently both. But if it's systematic, if it's systemic, we also have to acknowledge that systems reflect values. And systems are themselves stories given means. And the story here, the story of this summer, perhaps the story of our culture, is violence and oppression. It is deep, it is cultural, it is deep in our history, and therefore it is deep in our hearts. The violence of the summer is shaking our proclaimed values. It is shaking our stories that we tell about ourselves and lifting up a mirror and asking us to see if we are who we say we are. That's as a country and as this community and as individuals. And of course, the violence of this summer is also killing people. And it's breaking our hearts, or at least showing that we have been walking for a long time with already broken hearts. Now, I have some facts that I really hesitate to share because they put us right back in our head, right? Which is my safe place. But it's also, because it's safe, it sometimes takes the wind out of my sails. And I'm not sure that safe is the place that I need to be. But I'm also on Facebook a lot. And this is the place where a lot of our cross-political discussions happen anymore. And we will be, and we ought to be, as we were challenged to be last week, talking to people who think differently than we do. Now, this is a ball of string. Facts are a ball of string that can get you out of the maze a little bit, or at least reveal what the maze is. So, these are not easy facts to hear. And there's a lot of demographics to cover, because that is the society that we live in today. So when we talk about state killings carried out by officers of the state, 88 Latinx people have been killed by police this year. And if you just want to extrapolate that out from state-sponsored violence, police violence, we also know that the bodies continue to pile up in the desert south of us. And between October and January of 2015, for instance, they discovered 117 bodies, which was higher than the year before. That is a systemic problem as well. This summer has seen the worst mass shooting in U.S. history. And I discovered in my research that LGBTQ people are more than twice as likely to be the target of violent hate crimes as any other minority. "26 police officers have died in the line of duty this year, compared to 18 last year. And it's not just in the line of duty. I mean, they're actually being targeted. We saw that in Dallas. It happened in Tennessee also last week. There's some slightly good news that injuries and attacks on police have been declining for 15 years. And that's an important thing to know right now. The assaults on police have been declining steadily for 15 years. It's an important thing to know. There's no war on cops. And that predates, by the way, militarization, which is a key point if you're in a discussion with somebody that says they've gone down because we've militarized the police. The decrease in police attacks have started before the militarization of police. We've also, two somewhat conflicting, very compelling papers were released in the last 2 weeks. Timely, as unfortunate as that is. We've learned that African Americans are far more likely than whites and other groups to be victims of the use of force by police. But I mean, you know all this. I'll post these online, and you could look at these sources and these facts, and they're important for you to hear. They're important for you to know. They give you the twine to get out of the maze. They present some interesting questions, like in the same week that we learned that, well, we have confirmed that cops target black people more for violence, target them violently. The actual shootings and killings of white and blacks, there's no evidence of racial bias. This is from another paper released by a very reputable person at a reputable institution, who, by the way, happens to be black. So those are two things that we hold in tension with one another and cause question. They question each other, and we have to look at both of those. We cannot be reactive. We have to be open to the data, and then question what is going on. If those two things are both true, what's behind this? So I also wanted to look at, because now I move into trying to fix the problem, right? That's another safe place to be, is fixing the problem. And so I look at the British versus us, because you know the British don't carry guns, the cops don't carry guns, and handguns are virtually illegal in Europe, or in England. In 2012, 409 people were shot and killed by American police in what was termed justifiable shootings. In that same year, British police officers fired their weapons just once. Fired their weapons. And no one was killed. According to The Economist, British citizens are around 100 times less likely to be shot by a police officer than Americans. Albuquerque, shot and killed 7 times more people than the Brits killed. In a 1-year period. Albuquerque. Now, 25 UK officers died in the line of duty in this century. 25 since 2000. In the US, that number is 2,445. Nearly 100 times the amount of police officers are killed in this country as are in Britain. So I just wonder what would happen if a police stop occurred with the person inside the car knowing that they were not gonna be killed, no matter what. That at the very least, they would get away. There might be some fisticuffs or maybe a canine or a taser, but that wasn't going to end in their death. How would that change the very beginning of that altercation or that incident? Speculation, and a hopeful speculation on my part. And so all of these are very, in some ways, they're abstract. We hear them, we feel them a little bit real, but this happens particularly with the border, I mean, that happens right in our backyard. And even closer still, last week, somebody set it's all things told, not a horrible ordeal, but can you imagine this happening to our community? Someone set the trash can on fire outside the Islamic Center, which is, we could walk there after church. 2 bottles of water, we can get there. It's close. This stuff is happening in Tucson too. And so I'm giving you all of this stuff. It's the whole culture. There's so many targets of violence in this country right now. And it leaves me confused and depressed, despairing, and in a whirlwind of reactivity and running for all of my safe places. And it's not just last week, right? It's centuries. In this country, it's centuries. But we do have tools. Some people are saying this is not right, and they are saying that to the kings, and we can listen. And we have tools to help. White America is slowly and fitfully and sometimes painfully, actually probably always painfully, waking up to the systemic violence and ugliness that undergirds our sense of security. We're finally hearing someone say that is wrong. Or we are hearing it again. The question is, do we have the patience and the will to go within, to pick up the string that traces our steps back to how we got here? That is going to reveal the maze that we have built. And then do we have the courage to face the monsters that we have hidden in that maze? And it would be easy to get bogged down in despair, and despair. It's worth despairing. But we can't stay there. And what I hope you hear, what I hope you walk out of today, and what I hope maybe was coming up for you in the first part of the reflection, isn't how terrible the world is, although there are parts of the world that are terrible, parts of our culture that are terrible. What I want you to feel is that the work begins with us, with you. The work does not begin someplace else by somebody else. If we leave it to that, the kingdom of God will be very delayed. The work is within us. And that's actually good news. It's going to be painful. It's going to be frightening. But it's the work that needs to happen, is within ourselves. So last week, Kim brought to us a powerful message about this idea that in Germany, people were walking past the ovens that were incinerating people. And they just grew accustomed to that. And then the question became, what ovens are we walking past? And here's the thing that really highlights is cognitive dissonance. And even Here's what it's going to look like. When you notice the oven that you're walking past, you will turn to that oven and you will look at it and you say, I need to do something about that. Except perhaps you have someplace to be, or you're not prepared, or your shoe is untied, and a number of different justifications for not addressing the problem that you now see will arise. This happens. It's happened to myself. I've seen it happen to others. That is part that you could have that expectation, and when you understand that that is happening, just note it so that you can get over it and proceed. So, I was at a gathering of ministers that had received the invitation to do some anti-oppression work. And we thought, naturally, this is what we do. This is what we came here to do. But as the invitation became specific, we found a number of reasons why it was also problematic. And decided not to get involved. And then there was a moment. And in that moment was a question about who we say we are and how we're behaving. When this happens to you, because it probably will, take that moment. In that moment, these ministers of the UU tradition and I decided to reconsider, to let our stories, let our faith shape us, to let it call us into and walk us through the fear. Some of that fear was going to be discovering how implicated we were in this oppressive system. But our faith calls us to do that. And in fact, we did reconsider. And we accepted that invitation to do the work. I've seen that happen in slightly different ways, at least twice in a group, and maybe 10 times that many times in my own heart. And I know there's more to come. I know there's more to come for me. And if you want to do justice work, and if you want to make this world a better place, and if you want to do something to make next summer less violent, then that discomfort is coming for you as well. And that is okay. That is the work. And you will know you are working when you feel like you are working. This is the power of stories. They shape us. And we find our stories are more powerful because, and when I say we, I mean this group here, we find that our stories are more powerful because they are practiced in community. We practice our stories together. That's how they get legitimacy. That's how they get stronger. We pick each other up when we fall, and then we're able to learn from that lesson here and go into the world a little bit stronger. So this is religious practice, these maintenance of these stories, our values, and you are the priests and prophets of this religion. That is our tradition, the prophethood of all believers, the ministry of all members. You are the ministers of these stories, and you will minister to each other and to the world. And we will come here to practice because we need this kind of practice. We need this encouragement. And here's the thing about practice, right? Do we have any former athletes in the room? Or maybe piano players? I don't know about piano. I don't know. Piano players, athletes? All right. Was practice easy? Was it comfortable? Did you get your butt kicked sometimes? That's going to be the same way it is here. The stories that we tell about ourselves need to challenge us. I don't think that we are living into the stories that we tell about ourselves. And living into them is going to be difficult. It's not going to be comfortable. And sometimes we're going to get our butts kicked, even by our teammates. But they're also going to pick us up. We're going to have to change our habits. We're going to have to go out of our way. And I mean that literally. When we're going to do anti-oppression work here, we are not in a bubble where we particularly find ourselves amongst people who are oppressed up here on the northwest side of Tucson. We are literally going to go out of our way to introduce into our hearts and introduce into our reflections interactions with people who feel the oppression. I'm not entirely sure what that looks like. But we are going to go out of our way. We're going to get off this hilltop and open ourselves to a new way of being. So minister your story. Minister your story, the values that you have, these stories, minister them as you walk through discomfort, and pain, and through fear, and through the revealing of some difficult truths about yourself, to that moment where your cognitive dissonance rises up before you, where you see the oven and still don't want to do anything about it because it's scary. Let your stories guide you in that moment. The thing is, they're going to guide us into more pain, right? And so why would we want to walk into pain? Why would we want to have stories carry us into pain? Does anybody know why?
Because that's where your truth is revealed.
And truth is more important than pain, right? Is that what we're saying? I'm asking the ministers in the room.
The right thing to do.
The right thing to do.
That's where change takes place.
That's where change takes place.
We have tools.
We do have tools.
Truth is pain.
Truth is pain.
The only way through pain is through it, not around it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wisdom comes from pain.
Wisdom.
We have boats.
We're already in pain.
We're already there.
It wakes us up to our resonant suffering.
Yes. It wakes us up.
Use our pain to help others.
we will help others by revealing our own pain.